Agree. Who are we? What are we? And how does it relate to what you are trying to achieve here in your great work? I come from a background in the Great Pacific Northwest where I was a marine ecologist, an ecosystems thinker, if you will. And I washed ashore in the 80s when I tried to convince my cattle ranching grandparents that what they were doing in their farming operations actually affected the fish in the Columbia River. My grandfather's comment at the time was, "Keep your regular job, Deb," you know. And so I thought to myself, well, okay, so things end up in the water. Maybe I need to go work on land and work with the food and agriculture system to talk about a systems way of looking at issues and find ways to collaborate, to work together on how to make changes on the landscape. So that really set me up for 34 years later, the position I now hold at Agree. So with that, I want to let you know that I am so pleased that William Nelson and Barbara Lee found me and I found them. We've had some great dialogue over the last year about what Agree's doing and how it intersects your work. I also will be followed today by Neil Conklin from the Farm Foundation. We've collaborated with them and his good thinking and good work and people have been very important fellow travelers in our efforts. And Frank Gasparini, also very much engaged with him on the whole immigration reform issue. And I think it was his event in Washington that made my first introduction to the work that you're all undertaking. So let's start with the fact that Agree is having a very, very big conversation. It was born out of the 9 foundations that William talked about. It is designed to be an 8-year initiative. The foundations themselves created the conditions for this to occur. They got group therapy back in 2008 after the 2008 Farm Bill, and they found out all these different foundations were competing with one another, and more importantly, were not engaged with mainstream agriculture and the policy makers. And so they set out on a journey to see if they could collaborate amongst themselves and figure out a way to really, really have an opportunity to speak across the value chain. And could they in fact have a safe forum to share share diverse interests and learn about food and agriculture in a different kind of way? So Agree fosters this opportunity. And by the way, Agree is not an acronym. It was born after a couple of beers, and we were like, well, we're trying to agree on something. We're trying to bring all these very diverse groups together. Oh, why don't we capitalize A and G? That'll be catchy. And we're like, yeah, okay, Agree. And then our tagline, transforming food and agriculture. We were trying to connect where the agriculture products go when they get into the food chain. So that's what Agree is. It's just a name, Agree. We are trying to harness the power of really diverse interests, and that is not an easy thing to do because the 9 foundations and the individuals that we have gathered together because they've changed, we've morphed, we've matured, had very targeted, if you will, siloed, and silos are good technology, don't get me wrong here, but they had very, very narrow interests, even though we're all connected, even though there's this ecosystems way of thinking about food and agriculture when you step back and look at it. So all these policy ideas, when the first time the Agree group met, were thrown out on the table by everyone around the room. How are we going to feed 9 billion people sustainably? How do we improve livelihoods? How do we increase productivity and intensification in a sustainable way? How do we elevate the whole debate around food and agriculture to a national priority, make it a national priority in our policy debates, not only in Washington, but internationally? This group, by the way, when I was first hired out of the Mars Corporation, where I was a lobbyist, that's the other thing. They wanted to create a bipartisan group. They wanted to create a very diverse group, and they wanted somebody that no one would expect would actually want to do this. So they hired me out of the Mars Corporation, and at the time, we only had one chair, and that was Dan Glickman, who had agreed to this crazy notion that we could gather all these diverse people together. So Dan and I set out on a journey to how are we going to do this? Well, we have 4 very diverse co-chairs now. They do come from different worlds, and as we say, there are 2 for, 3 for, 4 for. You know, Dan was a former congressman, former secretary. Jim Mosley's an active farmer, a Republican, worked in Bush 41 and Bush 43. I might add, I was his chief of staff when he was deputy at agriculture. Emmy Simmons, an international and well-known development and food assistance expert. And Gary Hirschberg, one of the co-founders of the organic movement in this country, and founded Stonyfield Farms, the organic yogurt, which he has now sold to Dannon and serves as chairman of the board of Stonyfield. Who knew these guys could all even get into a room and have a civil conversation, but that's exactly what's happened. And it takes, the Meridian Institute is a facilitation company. It's a nonprofit that really does connect people to solve really complex problems, and they have a lot of subject matter knowledge in what we're doing, so that helps a lot. We have 34 advisors, and they truly do represent the spectrum of the value chain. We have financial people, we have, the executive vice president of DuPont is with us, Jim Burrell. We have Walmart, we have Cargill, Dave Bodler, whom I'll see next week here in Minneapolis, is part of it. But we have the environmental voices. We have the nutrition voices. We have the international development voices, rural development voices. We have large monoculture operators, both in hogs and cattle, but we also, and wheat and corn and soy, but we have organic, small, diversified operators from different parts of the country. We have academics, Dr. Mark Keenum. Many of you may know him. He is now the president of Mississippi State University. All these very interesting people have gotten together. And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't as hard as you think when people do behave themselves socially when they get together. You can see the foundations in this slide on the left. By the way, the operating rules are there's I say an iron wall. It's not an iron wall. There's a wall that's semi-permeable between what the foundations think and what we're doing. So there's no predetermined outcomes. We weren't set up to be an environmentally driven group or a conservative driven group. We were set up to have a honest-to-God dialogue about 20, 30 years from now. How should we be directing our U.S. policies, and not just federal government policies, but corporate policies in trying to achieve the goal of producing more food sustainably. Our research committee, you can see, we've also engaged lots of other external resource experts to help us in our deliberations. So, our mission, and I think the bold is really the core to what we're trying to achieve. We're elevating food and agriculture policy as a national priority, right up there with energy and national security. And there will be work coming out of one of our research academics. Chris Barrett is issuing a book next week on this very subject. He was paid by the national intelligence community to write a book about how important world peace will be and our strategic interests will be connected to feeding people, food insecurity issues, and water issues and energy issues surrounding the production of food around the world. The lights are in my eyes, but I can't, I'd see a show of hands. If you saw yesterday, Chinese company closed a deal to acquire 9 million acres in the Ukraine. This week, for wheat growing purposes, a private company, the Chinese have now closed the deal on Smithfield Foods, largest pork producer in the world. And the Chinese are actively working in the Powder River Basin of Montana and Wyoming, purchasing coal that is shipped out off the West Coast. So strategically thinking, our interests are really tied to what's going on in food, water, and energy. That said, we have identified 4 critical challenges. And these 4 critical challenges are very basic. You know them, you live with them. If you had been in the room with us, you would have said the same thing, I'm sure. Focusing on people and on places. Meeting the future demand for food, strengthening farms, communities, and livelihoods of people in rural America and in urban America. Improving our nutrition and health, and conserving and enhancing our soil, water, and habitat. We get that this is a big conversation, and we get we can't do everything, and we get we're just a group of committed individuals trying to catalyze the dialogue around change. We're not going to do it by ourselves, and a lot of the issues that we're dealing with have been thought up by people in very different places. So how to bring that together, that's I guess, our greatest strength is our convening power and our diversity and commitment for change. As you can see, these 4 challenges are driven by 14 strategies. Originally, we had 40 strategies, and we tried to group them together into some coherent way to work on 14, but even that these strategies can be nested into 6 different initiatives. Our approach, or as they call it in foundation speak, our theory of change. That's new speak for me because I come out of the corporate world and we didn't do theory of change. We were held accountable by our business plans and our strategic plans. But theory of change, was built around diversity, getting different voices around the table, and then in that first 2.5-year period, which is where we are right now, moving into the center box. The center box is about, okay, can we in the next 9 months produce strong recommendations with pilots, actions to go with those recommendations to show how we can get something done. There's the what and then there's the how. We're hoping that next May we will issue recommendations. May or June, don't hold me to it. It depends on how fast we can get the group to really settle on some controversial issues, which I'll speak to next. And from that will be born advocacy work. Advocacy work, not only are we a 501c3, but I have a 501c4 program as well. Thank goodness, because a lobbyist has to keep legal, and I need resources to go do my advocacy and with my fellow colleagues in the community. So after we announce next year, the idea then is we spend the next 4 years seeking change, which takes us through the next presidential election. And there's a lot of discussion on how do we prepare our work for the next presidential race. I would add that we were never about this farm bill. Go figure that one. We started out with, we're not worried about the near-term, short-term issue. Well, because we've been plagued with Congress's inability to get something done, we now are going to have, I think, some relevant things to say next year. I don't know what's going to happen to the farm bill, let alone immigration reform, let alone the budget and debt ceiling. I didn't read this morning's paper, so I don't know where we are with the debt ceiling. But our priority strategies come down to creating a stable and legal food and agriculture workforce, which is why you're here. How do we deal with the needs of farmers and farm workers and their children and their families? It became the highest priority at our very first meeting here at the McKnight Foundation. We sat around the table with 34 people that didn't know each other, 4 co-chairs, 9 foundations, 9 research academics, and we started the dialogue. And it came, interestingly enough, from the organic farmer who said, my biggest problem is I don't have a legal workforce, and we need to have one. These people have been here. Their children were born in the U.S. It's an issue. And that erupted into a unanimous conversation, a unanimously held view that we need reform. I did not know that. That wasn't on the 9 foundations list. It wasn't on our 4 co-chair list. But as everybody spoke from their emotional position and from evidence, it became the #1 issue. And it didn't matter whether you were Walmart or DuPont. The need for PhD scientists and high-trained individuals in nutrition and seed and animal sciences is right up there with the need to have skilled, legal farm workers in working, in our operations in the fruit and vegetable, dairy business. I did not know that combine operators, that custom combine operators are, I don't know the statistics on this, but a majority of those drivers, those combine consultants, are from South Africa and New Zealand and Australia. I didn't know that. I did not know that the cows in the Vermont organic dairies only understood Spanish. I didn't know that. So that's the reality we were dealing with. So I spend time on this. I'll also talk about it towards the end of my speak, and if I'm going over, I apologize. I'll try to speed it up here. Access to nutritious food through a food systems approach. Big issue. Increasing our productivity by conserving and enhancing soil, water, and habitat. Attracting young people, our research, education, extension priorities need to be addressed. And risk management tools. We've heard from large and small alike that risk management tools are, in fact, a necessity of our farming system. Not only here, but internationally. Quickly on ensuring access to nutritious food. Our short-term position we took is basically the Senate position on reducing the resources for SNAP. But the big long-term vision for AGREE that we're really debating on is the N in SNAP, increasing nutrition as part of the safety net program. But it's not just about the poor in nutrition, it's about all of us in nutrition. So we're looking for several innovative ways around behavior. And this is where the private sector and the retailers have a big role to play. And so we're having a big debate and discussion around what are the tools around behavior. And it's behavior of putting your seatbelt on and putting your roll bar on your tractors. It's that same what drives us to making changes that are good for us, whether it's food we ingest or the machinery we drive or the pesticides we're applying. The business around soil, water, and habitat. The biggest concern farmers and ranchers have is they would love to have consistency and assurances that the activities and actions they are taking really do meet regulatory challenges. And as you know, our laws are siloed: water, air, solid waste, FIFRA, Plant Protection Act. All those laws are getting in the way of one another to have consistent work. And organic matter in soils, another big issue, whether the organic guys are instructing the traditional guys about building organic matter. It's a rich discussion, and it's really been I've learned a lot. Research, education, and extension. That's another one, like stable legal workforce. Big issue. The E in extension. The 15,000 extension workers or extension agents in the U.S. How do we take those individuals and combine them with all the knowledge and knowledge transfer agents you have in worker safety and health? I don't know. That's something that's on the table, as we've been admiring lots of problems, and now we're admiring lots of recommendations. But this is a big issue, that and prioritizing research, getting young people engaged, looking at K through 12, looking at 12 through graduate school. What are the different mechanisms that avail themselves to curriculum and learning around food and ag systems? Attracting young people. Another big interest area, and the growing niche is this business of regional food systems. There's a lot to be said about this growing niche. It's connecting the urban environment with rural America again. Yes, it's an area where there is controversy in some minds, but really there isn't. It's connecting buyers and sellers of produce and proteins, and it's really alive and well. And safety, worker safety and child labor are all part of that dialogue. Creating a stable legal workforce. How do we keep the U.S. competitive? I've said it, I'll say it again, we need immigration reform. I think if all of you, when you leave, if the one thing you take away from this talk is you go email your congressman or woman and say, hey, pass immigration reform. It's needed, and it's needed now. And there's lots, you're going to hear from others about the subject as well. Okay, now I know I'm out of time, so with that, I want to talk about several themes that have emerged in our dialogue around stable legal workforce. One of them is, if there is legalization of the 1 million plus people on the ground working on farms and ranches and in dairy parlors. What are the opportunities for you all to really ramp up and consider the work that you have underway? And I looked around at at the presentations last night at the cocktail hour, the learning session, and I see that a lot of good work is happening, and I think there's going to be more work needed. And the other part I want to end with is this business around retail putting pressure on the supply chain. And I'm going to point out an abstract that you should all read that Dorianne, I had dinner with Dorianne last night, and I read the abstracts. She talks about voluntary certification systems to protect children's safety and health. I want to draw your attention to it for a really important reason. Regulations by retail are happening across the board. And if Costco and Walmart and Whole Foods and Kroger's and Safeway, all the big stores, or the manufacturing companies that produce food that go into retail, start calling out needs and changes in the supply chain around worker safety, health, child labor, the environment, you have to respond. And we don't like that. I remember sitting at my desk at the Mars Corporation when the call from Bentonville came in saying, "What the heck are you guys doing about sustainability and climate change?" We're like, "Well, why are you asking us?" And all of us that have been working in food and agriculture have had that call and had that trip to Bentonville. But what's happening with these certification systems that are emerging is that they're not, that some of them are siloed and some of them are merging together. There's a new one out in California that Costco entered into with a strawberry grower and strawberry workers. It is called the Equitable Food Initiative. I call your attention to it because it's being tried out. And there's another big retailer very much interested in doing something similar. It's combining worker safety and health with environment and with food safety. So this is the trend we see as AGREE has had its conversations around the country, a place that's occurring. There's the federal government rules and regs and the state rules and regs, but this whole voluntary certification effort is really important. And I think Dorianne spells out the issues very well in her abstract, so I commend her for putting that forward. But that is the trend. That is a growing trend, and I don't see it throttling back anytime soon. So with that, I will conclude. I will be here at the back of the room if you're interested. If you don't get our daily news feed, I would highly recommend you go on to foodandaggpolicy.org and sign up for it. It's really good. You get a snapshot of 4 or 5 different stories about what's going on in the food and agriculture system. So thank you so much, and have a good day.